Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Good Stuff. I'm Kevin Bille, and as always, we appreciate you joining us today. And today joining us is Grant Baldwin. Grant is a speaker, podcaster, author, entrepreneur, and according to his Twitter page, he's an ice cream lover. Grant, what's up, man?
Man, I do love me some ice cream. Are you an ice cream guy?
I am. What's your favorite?
Like anything chocolate, I'm a fan of. So
we're off to a good start, man.
We are, and if people, if you're listening to the podcast, you need to check out the video here because we kind of look alike too. We got a similar thing going here.
Yeah, so, I told you beforehand. We have my son's name. Our son's name is Grant, but I wanted to tell you, our hairline we have in common, and it's my understanding you go by G Money as well, which I thought was really comical. And Brittany emailed me.
I don't know about that. That's news to me. But I've got some neighbors who, from time to time, if we're playing some pickup ball or playing some cornhole, and I'm playing well, G Money may come out.
I love it. I love it. I can't wait to tell my son that he definitely promotes himself as that. So, hey, just take me back to the start here. I love your journey. And I just want you to kind of share that with us, please, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So if we go way back in time, in high school, I was really involved in my local church. My youth pastor had a really big impact on my life. And still to this day, it was one of the guys that I would credit as like probably top 5, influence mentor in my world. And so I was like, I want to do that. Like if I can make the kind of impact and difference in other people's lives that he made for me, like that seems incredibly rewarding and fulfilling. And so that's kind of the path I was on. I went to Bible college and then worked at a local church as a youth pastor and really enjoyed it. Parts of it I liked, parts of it I didn't like. The one thing I really enjoyed, felt like I was good at, was speaking. And speaking was one of those things that always felt naturally to me. I felt like I was okay at it, wanted to do more of it. And ultimately decided once I left that role as a youth pastor, decided like, hey, I want to be a speaker. How do I do this? And so started like stalking a bunch of other speakers and emailing them. And there wasn't a lot of great resources on how do you find and book gigs and how much do you charge and who hires speakers and like, how does this world work? And so eventually figured a few things out and slowly over time built a business as a speaker. Got to a point where I was doing about 60, 70 gigs a year all over the US and just loved it. It was an absolute blast. Had a ton of fun. And then at the same time, I was having a lot of people who are asking me like, hey, I want to be a speaker. How would I go about doing that? And so about 6 years ago, started a training company called the Speak Lab, where we teach people how to find and book paid speaking gigs. And so that's the core of what we do now. So run the Speak Lab and full-time husband and full-time dad. I got 3 daughters and a wife. So it's me and a bunch of women. It's the best. And yeah, man, that's my world.
There you go. 3 daughters, three boys here. Maybe we'll have to hook up something later on in time. But,
I don't know about that.
I know. I figured as much. I don't understand that world. But hey, I want to talk to you a little bit like we talked about beforehand, just a commonality there and leaving your job, right? And I would just be anxious to know, like, what did you discover during that time? Like, did you have a big takeaway when looking back on it now?
Yeah, I'd say several things that came to mind. So, if we go, we'll dig in a little bit here. We, trying to think timeline wise. So I remember the part of the challenge I was running into as a youth pastor was it wasn't like the type of thing that you clock in and clock out. Like it just felt like I was always on. And parts of it was fine. Like, we were young, wife and I, we didn't have any kids yet. And it's just kind of like, all right, we're just, you just do a lot and that's just part of it. At the same time, the guy that I was working for, my boss, wasn't the best guy to work for. And so that, sort of have some negative effects. And then my wife got pregnant with our first child. And there's nothing like bringing a kid in the world that all of a sudden you're like, oh, dang, I got to figure life out, And so I started like kind of really thinking about like, is this what I want to do? And I was talking with a couple other friends who were youth pastors and I knew that they were feeling kind of similar things. And so it really, if anything, it would just cause me to kind of think through like, what is it that I really want to do with life? And maybe it's this, and maybe it's something totally different. And so ultimately decided to leave this job. And at the time it was just, I had just massive amounts of doubts and fear and worry. Wife would have been about 5 months pregnant or so at the time. And so you've got a lot of good intention, well-meaning friends and family like, hey, so let me get this straight. Your wife is pregnant with your first child. You left your career. You don't really have insurance. You don't have there wasn't a different job I was going to. And so it wasn't like we had this, grand elaborate plan or something. It was just kind of like, yeah, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I just know it's not this. And so I remember even recently, my mom told us, she's like, I really thought you were going to end up having to move in with me. And I was fully prepared for that. And like, that's just kind of where we were at. And so what I ended up doing was I got a job at a security company, basically doing like door-to-door sales for like home residential security systems. I worked at a couple different restaurants as a server. And basically for a while there, I was just kind of like working odd jobs. I know this was like career aspirations. And it was just kind of like, I'm licking my wounds, just trying to figure out like, what do I want to do? What's next? Mm-hmm. What happens now? Figuring out what am I good at? What do I enjoy doing? And that's really where I kept coming back to the speaking thing. But yeah, I mean, long story short, that extended period of leaving the job and then starting as a speaker was, close to a year or so. And it was just, It was really tough, of just going like, what do I want to do with my life? Is going to college to be a youth pastor and then not doing it, did I just waste all that time and effort and money? And so at the time, there's a lot of second guessing and doubting and insecurities and fears, but, it really forced me to figure out what is it that I want to do. And I'm grateful for how things have played out.
Yeah, for sure. Stay there right now, if you will, for those insecurities, those doubts, those fears. Like, how did you tackle that, or what would be your advice to others? Because I think if we're being vulnerable, and others are as well, we're all dealing with that at some point in our lives with something or some things, right?
Yeah. And I don't know that it ever actually goes away. I think some of the vulnerabilities get, or some of the insecurities and doubts, they get a little quieter and you know how to handle them, but I don't know that they ever go away. I'll give you an example. Like literally right before we started recording this, I was at lunch with a guy, and he's an executive with a big multi-million-dollar company. And it's a company I've looked up to and admire. They're a step or two ahead of us in business. And so, I left that lunch, and my best friend, he and I were kind of messaging back and forth, and he's like, "Hey, any big takeaways from lunch?" I said, "Yeah, the big takeaway I had is they don't know what they're doing either." And it's just a reminder of anybody that you look up to, that you admire, that you respect. Like we're all just doing our best, making it up as we go. We look at, like in the coaching world, you look at the Coach K's of the world, and you're just kind of like, oh man, they got it all figured out, and they've won multiple national championships, and they can the best, recruiting abilities, and like. Yeah, but at the same time, like deep down, they're also just doing their best, just figuring it out, just making it up as they go. And so what does recruiting look like, today versus 30 years ago? It's vastly different. What does coaching look like today versus 30 years ago? What is, being a high profile a collegiate coach look like today versus 30 years ago in the era of social media? And like, it's just like, all of us everywhere, anybody that you look up to, you admire, respect, I promise you, they have the same questions and doubts and insecurities and fears of just going like, who am I? Like, what? Even like, you reach out to me like, hey man, we'd love to have you on the podcast. I'm like, what? Why me? There's plenty of other smart, better, more competent people out there. So I think I think those doubts, those insecurities, those fears are completely normal. And I think if anything, what you have to do is you have to learn how to manage those.
Yeah. And so what are some ways, like I will just say, as I've said on here a couple of times before, having an accountability partner in my life is huge. Having somebody coach me is huge. Constantly connecting with people and just trying to be authentic and ask questions and trying to better that. Do you find those things to be valuable? Is there anything else that you can provide our listeners or suggestions that you might give them?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. Like one would be, kind of the conversation that we've had thus far, as far as like just acknowledging that you're not superhuman, and just being, not trying to be something that you're not, and say, hey, if you have the doubts and insecurities and fears and worries, and you're not really sure what you're doing, that's normal. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think just not trying to be something that you're not, and acknowledging that is good. I would also echo what you mentioned there, as far as just connecting with other people around you. There are, I mentioned this close friend of mine. As soon as we, I finished lunch, then he and I are connecting and chatting and talking. He and I talk on a daily basis. And not only about, business, but also just being husbands, being dads, being entrepreneurs, and just life, health, fitness, anything like we're talking about, thinking about. He and I are in a mastermind with two other guys. So there's four of us, and we chat on a daily basis, just texting each other, just a group text thread. And so, there's days where you're talking about, hey, does anybody else feel clueless today? Does anybody else feel like you don't know what you're doing?
It's good.
And whatever, just just kind of reminding one another that those feelings that you feel are again, totally normal. And so I think, surrounding yourself with other people that can do that is super valuable.
That's good. That's really good. Hey, what separates though? I mean, I know, you just mentioned some leaders. Are there certain traits that stick out that you see consistently make them really good at what they do?
Let's see here. As far as just entrepreneurs or
I would just label it. Could we label it leaders, or does it have to be, do you think it's specific in terms of sport coaches versus businesses? Do you think it's maybe right there we go? Do you think it's different in terms of the world that they're in?
Well, I mean, there's certainly going to be like different skill sets that are going to apply differently in different areas, but as far as just being a leader, a couple of things that come to mind. One would be putting the good of others before yourself. Whenever I talk about our company, I always talk about it as us, we, our.
Yeah,
I don't talk about it as I, me, mine. You will not hear me talking about the Speak Lab as Grant's company. Yep. When people call it, your Grant's company, Grant's book, Grant's podcast, like I correct them. I was like, no, like you're a part of this. Like we're a part of it. I'll tell that to our team members, their name may not be on the cover of the book, or their face may not be on the podcast, or voice may not be on the podcast, but saying, no, like we're all a part of this. So I think that thinking through like the big picture of a team and the people that you're involved with is a big deal. I think a high level of humility of again, what we've touched on, of just recognizing that there's plenty that you don't know and acknowledging that and being okay with that. I think another thing that is helpful is just a genuine interest in the well-being and care for people and humans, the people the team that you're leading. It's people can tell the difference between people who are just saying something and versus like, no, you genuinely mean it. If I'm playing basketball and I know like that coach legit believes in me and cares for me, like I'm gonna dive on the ball dive on the court for that ball. And I'm gonna push a little bit harder in the fourth quarter, whatever it may be, knowing that like, no, that guy like genuinely loves me and values me and respects me and appreciates me. Like those things go a long way. So those would be a couple of things just like top of mind as far as, attributes, characteristics of being a good leader.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. What would you say, if I were just to simply ask, what did it take to get everything to this point? In terms of the podcast, in terms of the books, in terms of the speaking, in terms of Speaker Lab, in terms of your role as a father, in terms of your role as a husband, what did it take?
Well, time is frankly is a big part of it. I think it's easy to, again, look at anybody who, and you're like, they're doing something or have climbed a certain mountain that is appealing or intriguing. Like, I don't know that there's any like special sauce or secret ingredient or any magical power that, that I or anybody else has or doesn't have, as much as just like, I think a big thing is sticking with something for a long period of time. So, like in my situation, like I've been in the speaking industry as, professional speaker or directly involved with professional speaking for 15 years, so like in your case, you've been, in the coaching world, especially in basketball, for an extended period of time. And so you just have more knowledge, you have more connections, you have more perseverance, you've seen more, you have a better understanding of the marketplace and what exists and what you should or shouldn't do. And so there's just, I think that's a big thing, is just the longevity and sticking with something. It's really easy to kind of bounce from one thing to the next and kind of flavor of the month type of thing of, I want to do this. I want to coach basketball. No, I want to coach volleyball. No, I want to coach football. And it just, you just kind of bounce from whatever to whatever. And it's like, no, like when you really double down on something and you stick there, I think it's a lot easier to just build, wins over time. So I think that's a big part of it, is just like having a long-term perspective on things that, there's that quote that, what is it? It's easy for humans to overestimate what they can accomplish in a year and underestimate what they can accomplish in 10 years, 10 years is just a long time. 5 years is a long time. 2 years is a long time. We go back at the time of this recording 2 years ago, seems like forever ago, but like that was a pre-pandemic world. And so you think about how far you've come in the past 2 years, just in your own personal life or professional life. And so just having that long-term perspective. One thing I tell or remind speakers of regularly is you can do it all, but you can't do it all at once. Meaning that it's easy to say, I want to be a speaker and I want to have a podcast and I want to do a book and I want to do coaching and consulting and I want to do a course and I want to do a YouTube channel and I want to on and on and on the list goes. It's like, yeah, you can do it all. You just can't do it all at once. Like something's going to come first and something's going to come last. And so there's going to naturally be some trade-offs of some things that like you just can't get to. Like there's things right now in our business that I would love to do. And it's just like, we just don't have the bandwidth. We just don't have the time or the energy. And maybe at some point we'll get to them. Maybe we'll never get to them. But you have to recognize, like, you've got to be crystal clear and focus on, we're going to do this. We're going to focus on this, and not feel like you have to do and be and accomplish everything.
That's really good. That's really good in general. And I need to hear that too. And I think another thing I would tell people as well with that overestimate, underestimate, I think people have a tendency to overestimate the competition and underestimate themselves. You know, I think that's a big one too, that I would speak into people, you know, in terms of that belief. I don't know if this is, I don't know if this isn't a good question to follow up with, but like, what's it going to take to keep it going? Is it all those same answers, those things that you already alluded to, or do you think there's other things that'll help it sustain over time?
Yeah, I mean, some of it depends on the nature of what it is that you're doing. So, I mean, I can just speak to personally in our own business. Like, I want to make sure that we're building something that's not dependent on me, and I don't want to be a choke point for anything that we do. You know, like in the coaching world. You know, if you look at, you know, let's take right now, like this is Coach K's last year. So like, what's going to happen with Duke next year? You know, what's the program going to be like? Or is there enough of a foundation built there that can extend way beyond one individual personality? So anything you know, again, some of this depends on what you want to do. For some people, they want to build a personality-based business. Being a speaker is largely a personality-based business. And so it depends, you know, what you want to do with that. Another thing I would say would be to, take some of the pressure off of feeling like you have to know exactly how things are going to play out or exactly how everything's going to work. And you don't, you know, like, I mean, I have the same, again, kind of worries and doubts of going like, we have a really, you know, solid business and it feels like we have a really solid foundation. We have a really great team. We deliver a great product. I feel really, really confident and comfortable in a lot of things. But I'm also just like, I don't know, man, like it could come tumbling down tomorrow, like a pandemic or whatever could wipe us out and get something that's way outside of my control. But like, you just can't spend your life worrying about that crap. You know, like there's plenty of things that you can't do anything about. Nobody saw a pandemic coming, and it obviously messed up a lot of people personally and professionally. Like there's going to be some other form of a pandemic that's going to happen in life, you know, and that's just part of it. So I try to balance of, you know, thinking through and planning and preparing in the future, but also not being like overly anxious about things that I can't do anything about tomorrow. I can control today, and I can make some decisions to make sure we're as best as possible set up for success tomorrow. But like, I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. And so I think that's a big part of it as well, is just kind of like, again, kind of keeping things in perspective.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And I think what made me go back to coaching a little bit, what you said there, it's like, it's one thing when you're coaching to have a team. It was another thing to have a program. You know, when you had that program and you left the gym to go recruiting, or you were sick or that day and it ran itself, that's when you knew you were where you needed to be. I guess I'd be curious, going back to our earlier part of the conversation, how did you discover that passion, you know, of loving to speak? Was that something that was just always there and you kind of went about doing your thing, and then you came back to realize like, hey, this was it? This was what I've always enjoyed. This is what I wanted to do. Was that at a young age? Where was it?
Yeah. I mean, I remember even like in high school, you know, whether it's like at a speech class or something, and just feeling like, oh, this is kind of fun. I kind of enjoy this, feeling like there's there's something there, whether it's teaching a Sunday school class or maybe even like, again, as a youth pastor, one of the nice things in that type of role was it gave me an opportunity to speak on a weekly basis to students. And every so often I might get to speak on the weekends in big church, and just felt like, this is kind of cool. I really enjoy this. And when I was in college, I worked for a guy who was a full-time speaker. And so I kind of got to see a little bit behind the scenes of, you can actually do that. You can make a profession of it. Like I guess prior to that, I wouldn't have known like that's a thing. You know, being a full-time speaker is not necessarily like on the menu of typical options of what you could do in terms of a career path. So working with him also kind of exposed me to, no, this is a thing people do. And so whenever I left the youth pastor gig like that, it was certainly swirling in my mind, like, okay, I work for that guy. I got to see a little bit of that. I enjoy speaking. What would it look like if I was going to do this on a
Mhm.
full-time basis, and so I think it's like one thing I've found that's always been helpful for me is to look for people who are doing something similar to what you want to do and doing it in a way that you want to do it. Okay. So let's take the college coaching, for example. Let's just take coaching, for example. I have a friend of mine who was an assistant coach at the college level and worked for a couple of big coaches in the SEC, the ACC, and kind of made the rounds. And he was like, on one hand, it's cool. Like I get to be on a coaching staff of a premier program. On the other hand, like it's miserable. He's like, I remember, he's told this story to me a couple of times, where he's like, I remember showing up to like first day of I guess summer training and preparation, and the coach saying like, kiss your wives goodbye because you're not going to see them until after the season. And he's like, and that's the way they ran it,
Yeah.
And he said eventually he worked at a high school program and as a head coach, and he's like, it was so much better, And so there's trade-offs to it. I'll give you another example. When I was in high school, I played a little bit of basketball, and there was my junior high, middle school coach asked me to come back and be like an assistant coach with him, right? So, which was I didn't really do much. I just felt like I was cool, and so helped a little bit with him. But we had this one guy at the time who was this middle school student who turned out to be really good, and he's in the NBA now. So I'm just like I got to have something to do with that.
It's all you.
Anyway, so. And he's kind of been a journeyman. He's kind of bounced around some 1-2 year contracts here and there, but he's still in the league. But I remember a few years ago, I was speaking in Atlanta. He was playing for the Hawks, and I reached out to him, and he's like, "Hey man, come to the game." So I go to the game, and I'm sitting in with the families there, and I'm just like, this is so cool. Well, long story short, like he didn't even get in the game. He didn't even play. And so I go see him afterwards, and I was like, dude, you're in the NBA. This is like, how cool is this? There's an arena here and thousands of people, and you're here. You did it. And he's like, yeah, but like it was middle of the season. They just changed coaches. With a previous coach, he'd been kind of six man, was getting in every game, get good playing time. New coach, he hadn't played in like a couple of weeks. He's like constantly worried about, am I going to be traded? I'm going to, as soon as we finish this game, I'm going to hug my family. And now we're getting on a plane to go to the next city. And so outside looking in, I'm just like, dude, you made it. You're in the NBA. And he's going like, I didn't even play tonight, and like, yeah, right. I'm in the NBA, but like, there's a lot of parts of this that suck. And so again, all that to say, like play it out in terms of look at what someone else is doing and think like, is that what I actually want? If I was playing in the NBA, what are all those potential trade-offs? Is that what I want? If I was coaching in the NBA, if I was coaching at a college level, if I was coaching at a D1 school versus an NAIA school, if I was coaching high school, if I was coaching middle school, like what are the pros and cons of each of those? And just kind of thinking through is like, is that what I actually want to do? If it plays out the way that I hoped it would, is that what I would actually want and sign up for? So like this buddy of mine who, was the football coach, he gets to the top tiers in college and he's just like, it sucked. I hated it. It was miserable, and he switches to high school and he's like, yeah, I made less and it was much less prestigious, but it's like, my life was so much better. My marriage was so much better, So play it out in terms of like, if this went the way you want, is this what you actually want?
Yeah. And I would encourage young people along with that, Grant, if you don't, you might know you want to go into coaching, but if you don't know truly what that is like, seek somebody out and talk to them and get a transparent feedback. Because I think there's a lot of people, to your point, that do something like that. And then they realize like, oh my gosh, like I still talk to one of my good buddies who's at a high Division I, he's making a lot of money and there's a lot of good things about the job as of his role. He's an assistant. But like he's got like 2-3 weeks out of the year where he knows he has to take vacation. Where like the one thing for me, I was 25 years old. And what I realized I needed more in my life here recently, that it's flexibility, right? Like when you're the head coach, you can say who comes and goes, and that's a big thing. So I think identifying what that is and seeking out would be really good. I'd like to know, maybe this is just personal, but what makes a great speaker? Like walk us through the process of even developing that great speech, if you will, or consistently doing it over time.
Yeah. So I think I'll give you a couple of answers. I think there's a few things that are certainly consistent. I think at the same time, like what makes a good speaker can also be a little bit subjective. It's kind of like what makes good music or what makes a good movie or good art. One person may listen to music and be like, that's the most amazing song I've ever heard. And someone else is like, that sucks, and same with a movie or a TV show or whatever it may be. And so there can be an element of that with speaking, I think that some of the best speakers are really, really authentic, vulnerable, transparent, several of the things that we've been talking about here. I think it's really important to be very well prepared, and prepared and polished, I think, are two different things. Polished is where it's almost robotic and it's formulaic, and you can tell that they're so deep in their head. And prepared is like they've done the work, they're ready to go. They know what the talk is, but they're also fully engaged and fully present with the audience. And so I always want to see a prepared speaker. I don't want to see a polished speaker. A good example of this is actually if you look at a good stand-up comedian. A stand-up comedian will stand up there and they'll go for an hour telling you stories and bits and jokes and punchlines. But oftentimes, like the best comedians, it feels like they're just making it up off the top of their head. Like it just feels like it doesn't feel like they are regurgitating the script. And now I have to do this point, and then I pause for 3 seconds and no. It just feels like they're talking with a group of people. They're telling a funny story. It's a story they've told hundreds of times, and they've nailed the timing of it and the punchline of it and the delivery of it. But they're so comfortable. It's the same thing again in basketball. You look at some players and you're just like, how does Steph get his shot off that quick? Like, how does he do that? And it looks effortless to him, but it's also something where for thousands and thousands and thousands of hours that none of us have ever seen, he's been in the gym practicing and practicing and practicing. And so the same thing is true for a speaker. The best speakers aren't the ones that just get up and wing it, but it's the ones that have spent hours and hours and hours practicing and practicing and practicing, going over their content and their material so that they feel really, really comfortable and confident by the time they step up on stage.
Yeah, I used to tell our players, and I tell my kids now, it's winning in the dark. Like, are you willing to do all the things when nobody's watching, so that you've earned the right to do them when everybody's watching, right? I think that's what you're alluding to. Yeah. What's the difference? I think people would see a difference. I'm anxious to see if you would in speaking to 50 people or 5,000 people.
Yeah, the size is certainly a factor. And one of the factors in that is actually the room. People don't always think about this, but kind of the environment. So I'll give an example. Let's make a basketball analogy here. You have played in a lot of different gyms. You've coached in a lot of different gyms. And so on one hand, you're like, man, playing in a huge arena, for 20,000 people sounds amazing. And it is amazing if there's 20,000 people in there. Yeah. If you're in a 20,000 person arena playing basketball and there's 100 fans in the stands, it feels dead. Right. And so the room, the environment is really big deal. You look at like a lot of the Final Fours, they'll do in like big arenas that are not designed for basketball, and it looks awkward. It just feels clunky, Yeah. What's cool is Cameron Indoor, right? Because it's a small little gym, and like they pack that place. And so the energy there is insane, but not because of how many people are there, but because of the environment that it's created. So I'll give an example. There are, several years ago, I remember speaking at a gig in New Jersey, and I was speaking in a room. It was set up for about 2,000 people. And so I did a keynote there, and they had 2,000 people in there. It felt packed, felt full, felt awesome. Well, right after that, they were going to have me do a workshop for like 100 people, and they didn't have another room. So they're like, oh, we're just going to do it in the same room. And it's the same room, but totally different feel, a totally different environment. In fact, it reminded me, I'll give you a basketball analogy with it. I remember a couple of years ago going to see the Harlem Globetrotters, and the arena was like half full, and there was just no energy there. Like it just felt boring, and I'm like, this is the same show that they're going to do in the next city. But if the arena is packed, it just feels different. It's like going to a concert that feels empty versus like everybody's on their feet, everybody's into it. It's just a different feel. So 50 people versus 5,000 people, a lot of it depends on the room, which is sometimes a factor that you can't control. The other thing that's kind of interesting that I had a speaker mentor tell me early on is when I started doing a couple of bigger gigs that were several thousand person gigs, he told me that in those size groups, nobody's actually watching you speak. They're watching a screen where you're projected on. So there's a camera. The camera's on you. It's being projected on a screen. It's kind of interesting. Like I'd be up on stage and like the front row is not watching me. They're watching me on a screen, So you have to be aware of that. Like when some of those key moments come up that you're not talking to people, you need to talk to the camera because that's where everybody's actually looking. So some of those type of things, it's just kind of, you're kind of, I thought was kind of interesting. But at the same time, like, people are people. You also have to like really multiply and amplify what it is that you're doing. Meaning, like, if I'm talking to 50 people, but I'm acting like I'm talking to 5,000 people, it comes across hokey. If I'm talking to 5,000 people, but I'm acting like there's 50 people in the room, I look too small. And so you have to match the energy and the number of people in the room. Otherwise, it kind of feels off and out of alignment.
Yeah, that's good. That makes sense in terms of the arena and all that. Well, what's it like for you personally? And I'm just going to speak on my behalf, excuse me. When you're speaking to an audience and you know that there's somebody in that audience that doesn't like what you're talking, nothing is resonating with them at all. You almost like lock eyes with those people all the time, it seems like, and they're just like looking right through me, like I have no interest in what you're saying. Like, what's that been like for you? I'm sure you've encountered it.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, every speaker does. And so, when I was speaking quite a bit, I did a lot in the high school space. And so I did a lot of high school assemblies, and
that's a great example.
Yeah, I did a lot of high school assemblies, and also did a lot of like student leadership conferences. And the difference was, in a student leadership conference were students that wanted to be there. I raised my hand. I said, I paid money to come to this event. I want to be here. In assembly, they had to be there. And so the student would be like, hey man, you got me out of class. I'm thankful for that, but like, I don't care anything what you have to say. Right. And that was part of it. And so there's partly like some of the challenge of you're trying to get those people on your side. So in my case, and for a lot of speakers' case, you have to have some type of hook that gets them intrigued to just build rapport and trust. Again, you got me out of class, but like, why should I care about, I don't know who you are. Why should I care about anything that you have to say? And so humor and using comedy was a big thing, using stories so I'd spend, if I was doing a school assembly, I might spend 10 minutes just doing comedy. There's no value to it other than like, I'm just building a rapport. I'm just building a relationship, and I'm just trying to get you on my side. So when I start dropping something else that I at least got your attention, I've earned some respect that you want to be listening, and it's like, again, if you're coaching, the very first practice with a whole group, a new team or new class, you're just like, they don't know who you are. You're the coach. You have a whistle and a clipboard, but like, that's the extent of it. And so being able to like build that rapport, build that trust as soon as possible is really important.
This is just kind of a funny note, or we'll see if you find it funny as well. But do you ever notice the difference? Like if you're talking to a person before the speech, and you give the speech, and then afterwards, maybe it's the same person in general, there's just like a drastic difference. It's like all of a sudden I became 10 times smarter than what I was. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was talking with a potential client, and they're talking about this event they were interested in having me speak at. And they said, hey, the night before we're doing like this barbecue mixer hangout, whatever thing. Could you come to that? I was like, I can. It'll be a waste of time because you're just walking around and everyone's like, who are you again? What are you here for? And I was like, if you go to the barbecue after your speech, yeah, it's night and day, totally different. And people then like, oh, you're the dude, you're the speaker. Yeah. Like, yeah, then they want to talk to you. Then they have a question. But like, other than that, you're just kind of like, who are you and why are you here again? So yeah, it's definitely a night and day difference before and after a talk.
Yeah, that's funny. Hey, I want to wrap up here before we get into 3-pointers. I'm noticing some books there. I know obviously you're an author. Are you a big time reader? Like, what are some ways you learn and grow on here? We'd like to throw some book suggestions out there, or anything on your end.
Yeah. I don't, candidly, like, reading is not my favorite thing. Okay. And so this is something that I have a mentor and coach who challenged me on this actually earlier this year. I listened to a lot of podcasts. Okay. And so I go through a lot of podcasts. And so that's a good way. I like enjoying consuming content. I feel like, part of me is just kind of like, all right, so I could take, 5-10 hours to read a book, or I could listen to an interview with the author find a good podcast and an hour and a half interview and probably get 80% of the material. Yeah. Right. And so that's kind of always been like my, I guess, limiting belief. And so a mentor was just like, yeah, like the best leaders are readers. And he's like, you don't like reading? I don't care. You got to start reading. I was like, all right. So yeah, so I try to spend a few minutes each morning reading. I'm reading a book on marriage right now. I've got a couple here next to me. Here's a Patrick Lencioni book, 3 Big Questions for a Frantic Family. Anything by Lencioni is a really good book. There's another one here I have not, admittedly haven't started reading yet, but I've heard really good things about it from Dan Sullivan called The Gap and the Gain. So that's another one. Again, I have not read yet. The premise is simple to understand, but it's my understanding is the book is just amazing at fleshing it out. But the idea is, you think about like 3 points if you drew a straight line and 3 points, kind of A, B, C, and B, that middle point is really where we are. And so we look back at A is where we've come from, the gain that we've made is from A to B, right? But so much of our time we spend focusing on the gap between B to C. C is where we want to be. B is where we are. A is where we came from. C is where we want to be. And so we end up focusing on the gap between B and C versus the gain of how much we've made. And so the premise of the book is just kind of about happiness and satisfaction and gratefulness of, we focus on the gap of, I'm not at that level. I haven't accomplished this, here's where I'm at. And I'm not as successful as fill in the blank, or I'm not doing whatever. And we're focusing on the gap rather than the gain. Dang, look how far I've come. Like, look how far, like the progress that I've made. And let me look back here and like, wow, like things are really, really good. So focusing on the gain instead of the gap. So yeah. So again, admittedly, I don't read nearly as much as I should. But definitely listen to a lot of podcasts. And it's for me personally, it's a good way to consume content.
Good. Who would be a good guest? Somebody we should have on here, you think?
I'd have Aaron Walker. He's my coach. He's my mentor. He's a guy that I pay a bunch of money to meet on a regular basis and just pick his brain and say, hey man, he's probably 20 years older than me, and just say, I want to be a good husband. I want to be a good father. I want to be a good businessman. How do I do that? What do I need to do? So he's someone, another buddy of mine, well, I was trying to think in the sports world, Alan Stein Jr. I don't know if you know Alan.
Yeah, he's been on. We've had him on.
Okay. Yep. He comes from the basketball world.
Yep.
I would another like a good friend of mine, a guy named John Vroman. John is a guy who he leads a men's group called Front Row Dads, and the premise is to be family men with businesses, not businessmen with families. And he does a good job of just like, guys like you and I, we're motivated, driven guys. We want to be successful. The people that are listening to this want to do well in life. We want to reach the highest heights and are personally and professionally, but we don't want to do it at the detriment of our families. Like, I love being an entrepreneur. I love talking shop, but my most important roles are being a husband and a father. Right. And so if I screw up there, like the rest of this, I've really screwed up on. So that's the thing that really resonates with me. Just like, I love being a speaker. I love being an entrepreneur. I love helping people, but man, I got 4 girls that live here, my wife and my 3 daughters. And like, I got to nail it with them. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. Amen to that. Well, hey man, let's go rapid fire to finish 3-pointers. If you need to take a little bit more time, feel free, but we'll take you back to your high school days here, stick you in the corner and knock down some shots. All right. Cool, number man. 1, if people could learn one thing from this talk and you just want them to take hold of one thing, what would that one thing be?
Yeah, I haven't used this line directly, but a line I think about a lot, and I talk with our team a lot about, is who you are is more important than what you do. Who you are is more important than what you do. Meaning, again, if we're great coaches, if we're great entrepreneurs, if we're great speakers, if we're great fill in the blank, but like, again, you drop the ball as a husband, as a wife, as a mom, as a dad, if you're a shell of a human being, like it's not worth that. So who you are is more important than what you do.
Good. That's in What Drives Winning. If you ever read that book by Brett Ledbetter, who we've also had on here, but that is how some athletes struggle with that once they're done, being a pro athlete. That's really good. Yep. Hey, number 2, if Grant could have came over here behind the mic, which you've got yourself a great podcast, but if you could have asked Grant a question today that I did not ask, what would have you asked him?
Good question. What was your junior high basketball highlight?
That's good.
I'm ready for it. I'm ready for you. Want me to bring it? I got it.
I'm sure it was a breakaway dunk.
eighth grade city championship. I had 6 threes. I went 6 for 6. I was on fire. That was where I peaked. It was downhill from there.
That's good. Good to know. Hey, finally, good stuff is the name of this. Just give us some good stuff in closing before we jump into some of the things that you and your team are doing.
Yeah, I mean, at the time of this recording, we're kind of wrapping up the year. And like, man, I just feel incredibly grateful, whether we're in the season of the holidays or not. I think just gratefulness is such an important thing that we can all pay attention to and focus on, and gratitude. I take a walk with my dog every single morning around the neighborhood, regardless of what the temperature is, and just breathing fresh air, watching the sunrise, just be like, dang, like life is really good. It's not perfect, again, like we've talked about it, same doubts and insecurities and fears. And there's days where like I'm killing it as a husband or killing it as a dad, and days you're like, I hope they all still like me when I come home from this walk, and everything in between. But I think just continuing to be grateful is really important. So I feel enormous gratitude. I feel gratitude. I've really enjoyed this conversation and hanging out with you today.
Yeah, likewise. I do the same thing. Another thing in common with my dog in the morning. But yeah, hey, those are good. Couple things with you here real quick in the team. Just tell us more about your podcast, kind of what it's about. Why should we listen? What will we learn and take away from that?
Yeah, the Speaker Lab podcast. We've got like 370 some episodes, I think, currently.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, we've been doing it for several years. We do just a once a week episode, but all different. If you're interested at all about speaking, it's definitely worth checking out. We talk with people who are, full-time speakers who have been doing it for years and years and years, and at the highest levels, and those who are just getting started. Talk with people who are interested in virtual speaking or doing a book or coaching, and some said, hey, I'm interested in speaking, but I'm also interested in doing some other things related to speaking and sharing my message in other ways. I mentioned we talked about Alan Stein. He's been on the podcast before, and kind of his story as it relates to basketball and then transitioning into speaking. So yeah, if you're interested at all in anything speaking, I think one of the things with speaking, sometimes people assume like in order to be a speaker, you gotta, it's all or nothing. You gotta be a full-time speaker. It's like, you don't, there's some speakers who want to do 50, 60, 70 gigs a year, and some that want to do more, and some that are like, I don't want to do that. I want to do 5 gigs a year. Even again, at the highest levels, NBA coaches, college coaches, they do a few speaking gigs here on the side, here and there. And so you don't have to, they got a full-time gig. They don't have time to do 60, 70 gigs a year, but they don't mind doing, 5 or 10 gigs here and there. So yeah, that's certainly a feasible option. So yeah, if that's something we can ever help with, holler anytime.
It's good. Also, what am I going to get from Speaker Lab? And where can I find out more with that?
Yeah, everything we do is over at the Speaker Lab, thespeakerlab.com. And so yeah, definitely check out the podcast. We got a book called The Successful Speaker. It's another good resource if you're just like, man, I just don't know what I don't know. Maybe I've spoke a few times. I've spoken some banquet or something in the community, and I really want to enjoy it. I really enjoy it. I want to do more of it. I would love to get paid for it. I don't know what to do next. A lot of the speakers we work with are just figuring out how to go from 0 to 1, or the speakers who are like, I've done a few gigs, I've been paid a few times, but I don't know, like, how do I get paid more? How do I do more gigs? A lot of times what happens is the gigs that you get are ones that have kind of fallen in your lap. It's kind of word of mouth or referral stuff, which is good, but like you can't build a business that way. And so you have to be able to consistently understand, how do you find gigs? And we teach a process on that, as well as how much do you charge and how do you consistently charge, and what do you say yes to, what do you say no to, and just the ins and outs of being running a speaking business.
That's good. That's good. And then finally, where can we find you on social media?
Admittedly, I don't do a ton on social. I'm there. I'd say on Instagram at G Baldwin. Most other places, Grant Baldwin. But also feel free to email me. My email is grant@thespeakerlab.com. Grant@thespeakerlab.com. Let me know you heard about us here on the Good Stuff podcast. And again, happy to help however I can.
Awesome. Well, hey, this was a lot of fun, Grant. I love and appreciate what you're doing. I respect your approach, in terms of a husband and father and what you're doing there. It's a wonderful story, and just continued blessings with everything you have going on. I appreciate your time here today. I really do.
Thanks, man. I really enjoyed it, brother.
Yeah. Well, hey, everybody, thanks again for tuning in. As always, you can reach out to me at goodstuffkevin gmail.com. Always love to hear what you have in general, but especially, anything in regards to Grant. You've got his information, where to find him, but let us know if we can connect you in any way. And if you get a chance to hop on his pod and check out what they're doing at that website, it's as good as anybody when it comes to this speaking world. So thank you very much. And until next time, good stuff.